The letters arrived on a Tuesday, which was, as it happened, the same morning Mira Voss discovered the household accounts had been wrong for 7 months. She did not announce the discovery. She set down her pen, squared the ledger's spine against the edge of the writing table, and looked at the number for a long count of 3. Then she wrote it again in the margin, in case her first rendering had been wishful. It was not. 7 months of shortfall, entered in figures so clean and confident they had the look of honesty about them, which was, she knew from long experience, the first and most reliable warning sign that they were not. She did not know yet what the letters had to do with the number. She would, before the month was out, understand that they were the same thing, wearing 2 different faces. Had she known it then, sitting in the estate's small eastern accounting room, with the summer heat pressing against the shuttered windows like a hand that wanted in, she would have put her pen down all the same. She was not, by nature, a woman who turned away from a number that did not add. The letters came to the house in a single sealed packet addressed to the Duchess Harwell, who had been dead for 11 years. The boy who brought it looked uncertain whether to offer it to anyone at all, and so he offered it to Mira, who was nearest the door, and who, by the unspoken arithmetic of the household, was the person to whom uncertain things were reliably offered. She was the companion, a word that, in this house, meant a woman of no money and considerable usefulness, kept in a middle orbit between the family and the servants, and fully legible to neither. She had been at Harwell Court for 3 years. She had learned to take up very little room. She accepted the packet, noted the forwarding address of a London agency, and brought it up to Lord Harwell's study, where she knocked, received no answer, knocked again, and, hearing nothing but the specific variety of silence that meant the room was occupied and its occupant not inclined to speak, left the packet on the floor beside the door with a single line on her card. Letters arrived for the late Duchess. Thought you should see them first. She was halfway down the corridor when the door opened. Miss Voss. His voice was not loud. He had never raised it in the 3 years she had been in the house, and this had come to seem, to Mira, not a mark of mildness, but of something more controlled, and therefore more worth attending to. She stopped and turned. Aldrich Harwell, Duke of the same name and the same estate, was standing in the doorway of his study, holding the unopened packet in one hand and her card in the other. He was perhaps 10 years older than her, which placed him somewhere in his middle 30s. He was built like a man who had worked with his hands before rank made that inconvenient, and he had never entirely shed the look of it, the breadth of his shoulders, the calluses she had observed once when he had helped a groom with a panicked horse in the yard below her window, the way he carried his own weight as though he were used to it being useful. He had a quality of absolute stillness when he chose to be still, which was most of the time. You read the sender's direction, he said. It was not quite an accusation. It was the statement of a man assessing what was known, and by whom. I read the direction. I did not open it. She paused. I also found a discrepancy in the Eastern Ledger this morning, my lord, that wants your attention before the quarter accounts go out. I mention it only because I believe the 2 matters may be connected. Something moved in his face, not much, the way a very still surface of water moves when something passes beneath it. Maybe. The shortfalls begin in November. The agency direction is a London address, and the packet is dated January, forwarded 3 times. I cannot tell you yet what the connection is. I can tell you the pattern is suggestive. He looked at her for a long moment. She was accustomed to being looked at by people who were deciding how seriously to take her, and she had learned to stand still during it without either performing unconcern or projecting the anxiety of someone who wanted to be taken seriously. She was simply there, and accurate, and prepared to be either believed or dismissed. "Come in," he said. She came in. The packet contained 31 letters. They had been dispatched at intervals from December through May by something calling itself the Harwell Estate Matrimonial Correspondence Office, and they had gone out. She understood as Aldrich laid them in order across his writing table without a word, to 30 families of varying distinction, inviting their unmarried daughters to correspond with the Duke of Harwell toward the purpose of a possible match. The letters were signed, in a hand that was not Aldrich's, with the initial H, and each promised that serious correspondence would be received at Harwell Court for a fortnight's visit beginning on the 15th of August. The 15th of August was 5 weeks away. Mira read the nearest letter through once. Then she looked up. "Did you write these?" "I did not." His voice was, if anything, quieter than usual. "Does anyone in this house have the authority to—" "No." She looked at the 31 letters arranged across the table. "Then, someone has been corresponding in your name with 30 families, expecting their daughters to arrive in 5 weeks as prospective brides." She considered this, and someone has been making use of funds that do not appear in the Eastern accounts, which are the accounts for the London correspondence budget. She put the pieces side by side in her mind, the way she arranged mismatched figures, looking for the relationship. The question is whether the intention is to produce a wife, or to produce something else. Aldrich Harwell was quiet for a moment longer than she expected. He was looking at the letters, not at her. Then he said, with the careful precision of someone who chooses every word, "My cousin Bertram manages the London correspondence. He has done so for 4 years. He is also, since my brother's death, second in line to the title." She absorbed this. "Ah," she said. And then, because she was not in the habit of performing more understanding than she had, "I see the motive, but not yet the mechanism. A parade of wives does not eliminate an heir." No, he picked up one of the letters. "But it would establish, before any number of good witnesses, that I had invited them, that I was actively seeking a match. And if I then refused every one of them," he set the letter down, "there are those who would find the pattern legible in a particular direction. Given my history." "What is your history, my lord?" He looked at her then, with the expression of a man who had not expected the question, though he ought to have. She had been in his house 3 years, and she asked direct questions about everything: the accounts, the tenants, the state of the north roof. His gaze was the kind that assessed without performing assessment, clean and thorough, and she did not look away from it. "I will answer that," he said slowly, "when I understand why you asked it directly, rather than allowing me to explain it in whatever form I chose. Because the form you choose would tell me less than the fact itself, and I need the fact if I am to be of any use to you." There was a silence. Outside the window, a wood pigeon was going through its patient repetition, 3 notes up and 2 down, indifferent to the arrangements of the Harwell estate. "My wife," he said, "was rumored to have been unhappy. The rumor is 7 years old. She died of a fever. I can produce 3 physicians who will say so, but the rumor did not die with her. My cousin is not its author, but he has not corrected it." He looked at the letters again. "If 30 families send daughters in good faith, and I turn them away, or the visit becomes public and scandalous, or any one of them claims discourtesy, a man with my history cannot afford the confirmation of even the appearance of cruelty to women." Mira looked at the letters. She looked at the ledger figures she had written in the margin of her own notebook, which she was still holding. She looked at the window, where the pigeon had stopped and the summer heat was a visible shimmer above the garden wall. "Then," she said, "we will need to find the proof before the 15th. She tucked her notebook under her arm. "I would like access to all of the London correspondence files, my lord, if you are willing. And I would like to know whether Bertram Harwell was in the house in November, specifically in the week before the Feast of St. Martin." "He was." "Good," she said. "That is where I will begin." She was at the door when he said, "Miss Voss." She stopped. "You did not say whether you believed me." She turned halfway. He was still by the writing table, the letters arranged before him like an accusation the room had not yet finished making. "I believe your account," she said. "I also believe you have more information than you are prepared to offer yet, and that you believe you are protecting someone by withholding it. You are probably wrong about that, but I expect I will know which someone by Thursday." She paused. "And I believe that you did not send for 30 ladies, my lord, because if you had wanted a wife, you would have gone about it in a considerably quieter way." She left before she could observe whether he had an answer to that. Later, she would learn that he had not. She did not know that yet. She was already counting the days. The household had opinions about the letters before supper, which meant the household had opinions about the letters before Mira had managed to speak to the cook, the head groom, and the woman who managed the post, all of whom she needed. Harwell Court was not a large establishment, but it had the characteristic of small courts everywhere, which is that information traveled faster horizontally through the servant passages than it did vertically through the family, and that by the time the family believed something was private, it had been thoroughly discussed below stairs and filed under its appropriate heading. The heading, in this case, was visitors, female, matrimonial, quantity 30, due on the 15th. Mira found her ally in the traditional location, which was the kitchen garden, where Mrs. Pelham, 63, keeper of the court's domestic records for 22 years, and possessed of a tongue that had been described variously by the household as sharp, surgical, and catastrophically honest, was conducting a private war against the aphids on the climbing roses with the focused expression of a general who has tried diplomacy and found it wanting. 30, Mrs. Pelham said, without turning around, though Mira had not spoken. 30 women. In 5 weeks. I've got 14 good beds, 6 middling ones, and a linen situation that gives me literal sleeplessness. Whoever arranged this was either an optimist or they wanted to make certain we would fail. The latter, Mira said. She sat down on the low stone wall that edged the kitchen garden and opened her notebook. Mrs. Pelham, I need to know everything you can tell me about Bertram Harwell's visit in November. Specifically, did he have access to the correspondence room, and did he bring his own writing materials or use the house's? Mrs. Pelham turned. She had a pair of small scissors in one hand and an expression of complete unsurprise. He brought his own. I noticed, because he was particular about it, asked specifically that no one touch the leather writing case he kept in the second guest room. I noticed because the maids noticed, and what the maids notice I notice, on the general principle that one ought to pay attention to whatever is being hidden from one. Did he also have access to the Duke's own seal? A pause. Mrs. Pelham clipped an aphid-laden stem with deliberate care. The Duke's private seal is kept in the library cabinet, 3rd shelf. Bertram Harwell asked me for a library key on his 3rd day. He said he wanted to find a volume on estate drainage. Her voice conveyed what she thought of estate drainage as a plausible interest. I gave it to him. I should not have. I was not thinking. You were thinking he was the Duke's cousin and the second heir, and entitled to ordinary hospitality, Mira said. No one who knew what to look for would have been suspicious. You weren't meant to be suspicious. That's the point of doing it quietly. She wrote Mrs. Pelham's name in her notebook, with a small star beside it, which was her private notation for a source who would hold up under pressure. One more thing. in the letter budget, the London correspondence account. Have you ever seen Bertram Harwell take any active interest in it? Requests for figures, questions about amounts. Mrs. Pelham was quiet for a moment longer than the question required. He asked me, in November, what the household had spent on the last lot of London solicitors' letters. Said he was curious whether it was efficient. She paused. I thought he was asking because he was learning the estate. He is second in line. It seemed reasonable. It was reasonable, Mira agreed. It was also preparation. She spent the afternoon with the London correspondence files, which were kept in 3 boxes in the estate's record room, and which had not been touched in a systematic way since before Mira's arrival. She was methodical by nature and training, she had been, before the compound of deaths and reversals that had deposited her at Harwell Court, the second daughter of a land agent who had taught her figures the way other fathers taught daughters embroidery, as a basic literacy necessary to survival. The most reliable thing she would ever own. She read files the way she read rooms, looking not for what was present, but for what was present in the wrong place, or present too neatly, or present with the particular smoothness of something that has been arranged to look undisturbed. She found it in the November section. A requisition for a small but specific amount, not large enough to draw automatic scrutiny, carefully apportioned across 3 line items so that no single figure stood out, in a hand that matched Bertram Harwell's charitable subscription records, which she had retrieved from the guest room register on the premise that she needed to note which charities the house had been asked to contribute to during the visit. No one had questioned this. She had a gift for requesting unremarkable things. The hand on the requisition matched. She was nearly certain. She needed to be fully certain. She was not yet at the tribunal. She was at the preparation. She was replacing the files when she heard footsteps in the corridor, and then the particular pattern, 3 short, 1 long, that she associated with the Duke's stride. And she became aware of an impulse to put the files away faster, not because she was doing anything she should not, but because she found herself unexpectedly reluctant to be caught in the attitude of investigating his house without his express direction, which was not the attitude she had presented to him this morning, and which she wished to continue not presenting. She set the files on the shelf with the same deliberate pace she would have used if no one were approaching, and turned to face the door. He stopped in the doorway. He was holding a piece of paper, and for a moment they simply looked at each other in the early evening light that came through the record room's 1 small window, which was high and northern, and threw its illumination in a flat, honest way that left no flattering shadows. You have been in the files, he said. I have. She gestured to the boxes. The November requisitions. There are 3 line items funded from the London correspondence account that match neither the style nor the amount pattern of the usual entries. The hand is not yours. I believe it is your cousin's. I need a comparator document with his handwriting that carries a date and a witness so that a match cannot be dismissed as interpretation. Do you have such a thing? He looked at her for a moment. Then he held out the paper he was carrying. It was a lease agreement for one of the estate's smaller farms, dated January of the previous year, countersigned by Bertram Harwell as a witness, his signature clear and neat at the bottom. I thought, Aldrich said slowly, that you might want this. She took it. She set it beside the requisition page she had kept out for comparison, and she looked at both of them in the flat, honest light, and she was quiet for a moment. Then 2, then 3. Yes, she said, this will do. He moved to stand beside her, not behind her, not over her shoulder in the way of someone checking her work, but beside her, in the way of someone who wanted to see what she was seeing. He was close enough that she was aware of the specific warmth of him in the summer air of the record room, which was the warmth of a person who had spent part of the day outdoors, and also the smell of horses, very faint, which told her he had been in the stables this afternoon, which told her in turn that he dealt with trouble by doing physical work, which she filed alongside everything else she had been gathering about the architecture of him. The H on the letters to the families, she said, keeping her voice professional. Is it possible it could be read as standing for his initial as well as the title? Harwell, Bertram Harwell. He was quiet. It is possible, if one wished to claim so. He would have needed the ambiguity, she said. He is meticulous, your cousin. Whatever else. She straightened the pages. There is still the question of what he intended the visit to produce, specifically the appearance of cruelty to women, you said. But appearances require someone to give testimony about what they appeared to see. I don't think the 30 families are the witnesses, my lord. I think there is someone among them, or someone who will arrive with them, or shortly after, who already knows what they are meant to have seen. Another silence. The wood pigeon had resumed its work outside, somewhere in the evening garden. My cousin, Aldrich said, has a particular friend, a solicitor named Carew, who does estate law, who has done, on 2 occasions, legal work for men who wished to challenge a title on grounds of fitness. He paused. I did not mention him this morning. No, Mira said, without any expression. I was not. He stopped. He had a manner when he was choosing words carefully of going absolutely still first, as though language were a physical thing he was preparing to lift. I was not certain, he said at last, how much was useful to you, and how much was simply I could not organize it this morning. It was all inference, and I do not. He did not finish. He looked at the papers on the table instead. You do not lay evidence before people until you can lay all of it, she said, not harshly. I know. I am the same. He looked at her then, and there was something in the look that was different from this morning's assessing regard, something less closed, as though a window had been opened in a room that had been shut a long time. It was a brief thing. He put it away. There is more, he said, that I cannot yet lay before you. I give you my word I will, when I can. I know, she said again. I will be ready when you are. She left the record room. She did not look back. She was counting the days again, 32. The figure had a specific gravity to it, the way numbers always did, neither kind nor cruel, simply the thing she would have to work with. She went to supper. She ate her meal in its usual place at the lower end of the household's dining arrangements, between the middle housekeeper and the young land agent's clerk, and she was perfectly agreeable to both of them, and she was thinking about Carew the solicitor the entire time. The first callers arrived 3 days later, before the 15th, before the formal visit, because some families had misread the invitation's date, and some had simply decided that arriving early was advantageous, which, in the mathematics of 30 competitors for one duke, it might well have been. They came on the Wednesday, in a rather splendid barouche, and they were a Lady Sinclair and her 2 daughters, both of whom were very beautiful in a coordinated, expensive way that suggested significant preparation. Mira observed their arrival from the window of the east corridor, where she was carrying a stack of the London correspondence files to the study. She did not observe it for long. She had work to do. The Lady Sinclair discovered the companion within the hour, in the way that visitors always discovered the companion, which was by the compound method of asking where the housekeeper was and being pointed toward Mira instead. She looked at Mira with the particular expression of a woman of established rank encountering the personification of an administrative inconvenience, and said, "You are the companion, are you not? Miss Voss, is it?" "It is," Mira said. "I should like to see the Duke, naturally, and I should like a list of the other families who have been invited, so that my daughters and I can plan our time appropriately." She said this with the serenity of someone who had always found that requesting things produced them. "I will inquire about a time for Lord Harwell," Mira said. "As for the other invitations, those were not managed through this household, so I am afraid I cannot help you there." Lady Sinclair's fine brows moved. "Not managed through this household? Then who managed them?" "That is precisely what we are trying to establish," Mira said pleasantly. She thought Lady Sinclair would pursue this, but the elder daughter, Miss Wren Sinclair, who had said nothing so far, but whose eyes had been moving around the room with a quick, calculating attentiveness that Mira found unexpectedly interesting, put her hand lightly on her mother's sleeve. "Perhaps we might see the garden, Mama," she said, while Miss Voss makes her inquiries. Lady Sinclair, redirected, allowed herself to be redirected. Mira watched them move toward the garden door. Miss Wren Sinclair glanced back once, briefly, with an expression Mira could not immediately categorize. It was not the look of someone asking for help. It was the look of someone who had already decided they were on the same side of something and was simply acknowledging the fact. Mira tucked her files more firmly under her arm and went to find Aldrich. She found him in the stables again, which confirmed her Thursday morning theory about the stables. He was working a young bay horse on a long rein in the smaller yard, and he did it with the economical competence of someone who has been doing it long enough to think about other things simultaneously. She stood at the yard gate and waited until he had brought the horse through one more circuit, and then she said, "From the gate, they are in the garden." The first arrivals. Lady Sinclair and her daughters. He did not stop moving. "I know. Mrs. Pelham told me. The elder daughter has a great deal of sense," Mira said, "more than her mother is accounting for. I thought you should know." He brought the horse around to face her, and they stood for a moment on opposite sides of the gate, him in the yard with the bay horse blowing gently beside him, her with her files in the morning sun, the yard's old stone bright with heat. He had a smear of something on his right sleeve, and his hair was not arranged in any formal way, and the sum of these details made him look, Mira thought, considerably more like a person and considerably less like an institution. "What did she say?" he asked. She redirected her mother rather than let her embarrass herself. She has been trained to compete, and she has decided not to, which means either that she already sees it as a false competition or that she has her own reasons for not wanting to win. Mira paused. "I am not telling you to trust her. I am telling you she is the most interesting person among the arrivals and probably the most likely to be useful if it comes to needing a witness who came invited and can testify to what the invitation actually was." He was quiet, looking at her in the early morning light. The bay horse shifted weight. A swallow cut a fast arc through the air above the yard and was gone. "Why," he said slowly, "are you doing this?" She had known the question was coming. She had not decided how to answer it. She considered the available answers: loyalty to the position, professional obligation, simple accurate self-interest, and discarded each in turn as insufficient, not because they were untrue, but because they were not what he was asking. "Because," she said at last, "whoever wrote those letters in your name spent considerable effort rendering you illegible, making your history mean something it did not mean, and I have a particular objection to that kind of crime." She paused. "I am good at reading what things mean. It seems wasteful not to apply it." He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he said, "The document I mentioned, the thing I cannot yet lay before you. It is a letter from my wife, written in the last month of her life, given to a person I trusted, who I now believe gave it to Bertram rather than keeping it as she promised. If the letter exists where I think it exists, it says things that—" He stopped. "It says things that would end this entirely." "Where do you think it exists?" "In Bertram's keeping." He looked at his hands on the rein. He has not used it yet. That means either he does not have it or he is keeping it in reserve. For Carew, Mira said. His head came up. Carew the solicitor, she said, your cousin's friend. You mentioned him and then did not mention him again. He does estate law. He has assisted challenges on grounds of fitness. She kept her voice entirely matter-of-fact. If Bertram has the letter and is keeping it in reserve, he is keeping it for a legal proceeding, not a social one. The 30 invitations are the first instrument. The letter is the second, she thought for a moment. Which means he has not committed to the legal path yet, which means there is time, if we find the letter first. Aldrich was very still. Will Bertram Harwell be coming to the court for the visit? He has sent word that he intends to welcome the guests. He arrives on the 14th. One day before the families, Mira said. Of course. She shifted her files to her other arm. My lord, I need you to do something that may feel counterintuitive. I have been finding your intuitions fairly trustworthy. I need you to receive the visitors, she said. Properly, with the full hospitality the letters promised. Give the families exactly what was promised in the invitation, a welcome, a fortnight's visit, every courtesy. Do not tell them anything is wrong yet. Do not alarm them. She paused. I need them present when the time comes. I need them to be witnesses who arrived in good faith and can testify to what they witnessed. She looked at him. The way out of this is through the middle, my lord, in the light, with witnesses. She turned to go, and then his voice came, quiet as always, behind her. Miss Voss, you should know, my wife was not unhappy. That is not what the letter says. He paused. I want you to know that, before you find it. She stopped. She stood still for a moment with her back to him. She thought about the number in the margin of the ledger, the one she had written twice to be certain of it. She thought about a thing you write twice to be certain of. I did not believe she was, she said, and walked out of the yard. 3 more coaches arrived by Friday, which meant Harwell Court had 11 guests before the official date, and the Kitchens had achieved a state Mrs. Pelham described in her briefing to Mira as controlled desperation, differentiated from ordinary desperation by the fact that she was still controlling it. Mira helped where she was useful and stayed invisible where she was not, which was the work of years of practice in large households, and she watched the guests the way she watched account books for what did not belong. Most of the young women were exactly what they appeared, daughters of various families, arriving in good faith, believing they had been invited and curious about the Duke. A few were calculating in the ordinary social way, and this Mira held no opinion about. It was the natural arithmetic of their position. The Duke met with them in a formal drawing-room setting each morning, and she observed these meetings from the household side of events, which gave her a view both of him and of the guests, and she noted what she noted. He was courteous to every one of them. Not warm. Warmth was not, she thought, the native register of Aldrich Harwell, who had the quality of a man who had buried something and built over it, and did not like to be reminded of the excavation, but precise in courtesy, genuinely attentive when any of them said something that warranted attention, and not, she observed, paying particular attention to the beautiful ones, which was more information about his character than she had perhaps expected to gather in a drawing room. He was, on the Thursday, talking to Miss Wren Sinclair about drainage. Not metaphorically, she had apparently expressed interest in the actual problem of the Northfields drainage, which was a long-standing issue on the estate, and he was explaining it to her with the directness of someone who had stopped deciding whether to be technical 2 sentences ago, and she was listening with the focused expression of someone who found the problem interesting rather than the explainer marriageable. Mira watched this from across the room, where she was arranging the afternoon's correspondence. She thought, there is a woman who would have managed this estate very well and felt a small, precise, unwelcome awareness of the observation's emotional content, which she named, because she was honest with herself about numbers, and then she put it away in the column marked, not relevant to the current problem. She found the letter on the Saturday night. She had not planned to find it on the Saturday night. She had planned to find it by working systematically through the angles she had identified, which would have taken her until Monday at the earliest. What happened on the Saturday night was that she was passing the library, late, carrying a candle and her own thoughts, and she heard voices inside. Bertram Harwell had arrived that morning, a day earlier than announced, and the voice she could not immediately identify was in the particular register of a man saying something that he believed to be a threat and did not particularly want overheard. She stopped. She did not move toward the door. She stood in the corridor with her candle, and she listened. Cannot find it, which means you know exactly where it is, and I am tired, Aldrich, of this performance of injured innocence, which, I have been entirely honest with you, Bertram, I don't know where it is. You gave it to someone. After she died. I know you gave it to someone. A pause. Helena told me so. Before she died, she told me she kept it for you. Helena, Mira placed the name, the late Duchess's companion, dead now 4 years. Helena, Aldrich said, and his voice was very quiet, did not keep it. She told me she had burned it, and I believed her, because she had no reason to lie to me. She had been my wife's closest friend. Then it is ash, Bertram said, and you have nothing. Or she lied to you as well, Aldrich said, about giving it to you. A pause. She was very loyal, Bertram, to my wife's wishes. I have been wondering, lately, whether she understood what my wife's wishes actually were. Silence, a longer silence than the conversation required. Mira set her candle very carefully on the floor of the corridor. She walked away from it. The dark did not trouble her. She had the dimensions of the house in her bones, and she went to the small room off the east corridor where the household files were kept, and she stood in the dark and thought. Helena, the late Duchess's companion, dead 4 years. Helena's possessions, if she had died in the house, would have gone where? To her family, if she had family, to the household stores, if she had not. Mira knew the household stores. She had inventoried them in her first month because she inventoried everything in her first month. She had a list. She closed her eyes and found the list in the architecture of her memory, which was the specific gift her father had given her alongside figures, the gift of keeping things, not losing them, holding the shape of what she had learned. She moved through the list. Holdings from the late companion Helena Marsh, no relations recorded, no forwarding estate. 1 box. Stored, East Attic. She went up. The East Attic in summer smelled of warm wood and old fabric, and the specific dusty sweetness of things that had been put away by people who expected to retrieve them and then did not. Mira had the dark and her memory and her hands, and after 11 minutes she had the box, and after 3 more she had worked the lid open, and she ran her hands over the contents by touch, clothes, folded. A small book, a string of beads, a miniature in a frame she could feel the roundness of, and at the bottom, flat under the small book, an envelope. She took the envelope and the candle from the corridor floor and she went to her own room, and she sat on the edge of the bed in the thin light, and she looked at the outside of the envelope for a long time. It was addressed, in a woman's careful hand, to no one. On the back, in a different hand, confident, larger, 4 words, for Aldrich, when asked. She set it down. She had a principle about letters. She read account books because that was her work. She did not read private correspondence because it was not. But the letter was evidence, and she had come this far, and there were 27 days' worth of momentum behind her, and a tribunal she had promised she would build, and she needed to know what the letter contained before she could know whether it would survive being produced in a room of witnesses, or whether it was the kind of thing that would destroy him rather than save him. She held this consideration for a count of 30. Then she knocked on it from the outside, like a number that had not resolved, and understood that she was not considering whether to read the letter. She was considering whether to bring it to Aldrich tonight or in the morning, and whether she had a right to require him to open it in her presence. She did not. She put on her wrapper. She knocked on the door of his study. He answered it. He was still dressed, which meant he had not been to bed, which meant the conversation with Bertram had done what conversations with Bertram apparently did. He looked at her for a moment. He looked at the envelope in her hand. His face went through a series of very small changes that she read with the entire vocabulary she had been building about him for 3 years, and also for 5 weeks. Helena's attic box, she said. East attic. I found it an hour ago. She held it out. It is addressed in your wife's hand on the front, and in another hand on the back. The back says, for Aldrich, when asked. I have not opened it. He took it from her. He looked at the outside for a long time. She waited. She was good at waiting. She did it without moving, which meant he was aware of her in the way you are aware of something solid in the dark. I asked Helena, once, whether there was anything of my wife's in writing that I should know about, he said to the envelope. This is what she meant when she said there was nothing I needed to concern myself with. He paused. She was protecting me. She was keeping it until I asked correctly. And Bertram told you Helena had given it to him. Yes, then either she gave him a forgery, Mira said, or he was lying to see what you would say. She kept her voice level. You should open it, my lord. You should read it tonight, so that you know what it contains before the 14th. He looked at her. Will you stay? The question was simple and direct and entirely without elaboration. She thought about it. She thought about the column marked not relevant to the current problem, and the 32 days she had been counting, now reduced to 13. Yes, she said. If you like. He opened it. The letter was 3 pages in the Duchess Eleanor's hand, dated in the August of her last summer, and Mira learned 4 things from watching Aldrich read it. First, that he had loved his wife as a man loves someone he is also afraid of failing. Second, that the Duchess had known this and written to say that he had not failed her. Third, that the rumor of Eleanor's unhappiness had originated not with Bertram and not with household gossip, but with Eleanor's own sister, who had wanted her to leave her husband before she died, and had said so to 3 people in a position to spread the word. And fourth, that Eleanor had anticipated the rumor, had named its source, had named Bertram as the man most likely to benefit from it, and had written the letter not as comfort but as testimony. The last page was the most legible, which was the page Aldrich held the longest. I know what you will not do, and so I do it for you. I name the witness, and I name the truth. Let it be read before whoever needs to hear it. I am not unhappy, and I never was. I was only ill, and you could not fix that, and I have forgiven you for trying. Aldrich set the letter down with the careful steadiness of a man who had decided not to show what it cost him. He was very still. The candle was between them on his writing table. After a while, he said, she was a great deal wiser than I gave her credit for. She clearly anticipated the situation precisely, Mira said. She also wrote it as a public document. She says let it be read. She expected it to be produced. Yes, he was quiet another moment. Carew is coming on the 15th with the guests. Bertram told him there would be material. He does not know what the material is. He looked up. I should like, if you are willing, to tell you what I plan to do. I am willing, she said. He told her. She listened. She asked 3 questions, one of which changed the shape of the plan significantly, and one of which changed it very slightly, and one of which was about the morning timing, and they sat across his writing table in the candlelight while the house was quiet and the summer night was heavy outside the window. And they built the thing together, and it was, she thought, a very good plan. She left at 2 in the morning. At the door she said, without turning all the way, what your wife wrote, my lord, it was the truth, for what my observation is worth. She did not wait to hear his answer. She was reasonably certain she did not need to. The days between Saturday and the 14th had the compressed, urgent quality of figures being totaled under a deadline, each one complete but pointing to the next. Mira worked. She spoke to Miss Wren Sinclair on Sunday morning, in the garden, and this conversation went as she had calculated it might, which is that Miss Sinclair, having already decided where she stood, confirmed it in the first 5 minutes, and spent the rest of the conversation being specific and practical, and asking questions that were both. She would speak to Carew if called on. She had her own observations about the invitation's irregularities, and had kept a copy of the letter her family had received, which she produced from her inside pocket with the air of someone who had carried it specifically in case it became useful. Mira looked at the handwriting without commenting on it, and filed what she found. Mrs. Pelham spoke to the head of the postroom on Monday. The postroom head, whose name was Ord, and who had 23 years in the estate's service, and a memory for handwriting that Mira privately classified as a significant professional asset, confirmed that the letters dispatched from the London Correspondence Office in November had been collected not by any house agent, but by a gentleman, personally, who had used a letter of authorization signed by the Duke of Harwell. Ord described the gentleman with the unhurried accuracy of a man who had seen everything once and filed it permanently. The description matched Bertram Harwell without redundancy. Bertram arrived on the morning of the 14th looking very well pressed and carrying himself with the ease of a man whose machinery is running exactly as he intended. He was, Mira observed, beautiful in the specific way of people who have been beautiful so long that it has become a kind of authority, and he spoke to everyone in the house with the gentlest voice in any given room. And he called her Miss Voss with a warmth that was the warmth of someone dismissing you with a compliment, which she received without expression and filed next to the November requisitions. He sought out Aldrich after supper. She did not listen at this door. She had already heard what she needed to hear. The 15th arrived with the rest of the coaches. There were 31 families in total, plus Carew, who arrived with the second wave of coaches at mid-morning in a hired vehicle with a document case and the precise expression of a man who is about to be necessary. Mira observed him from the upper corridor and was not surprised. He was exactly as she had expected a solicitor named Carew, who specialized in title challenges, to look: careful, quiet, very clean about the collar. The gathering was held in the long gallery because it was the largest room in the house, and because Aldrich had specifically asked that all the guests and all the household principals be present for a brief welcoming address before the visits program began. Bertram had suggested the drawing room. Aldrich had said the gallery, mildly, in the tone that meant the matter was decided. Mira had suggested the gallery 3 weeks ago. She stood to one side near the windows with Mrs. Pelham, Miss Wren Sinclair, and Ord from the postroom. Carew stood with Bertram, who was at ease, who was almost perfectly at ease, whose left hand opened and closed once against his trouser seam, which was the gesture she had clocked on his first day, and which meant she had determined by patient observation that he was thinking about something he needed to manage. Bertram was thinking about something he needed to manage. Good, she thought. Aldrich stood at the room's center. He was not performing ease, which was different from being at ease and which gave him, in this context, the stillness of something that has been tested and knows it. He looked, Mira thought, like what he was, a man who had been managing a great estate in difficulty for a long time and had decided that this particular difficulty would end today. He looked like that without announcing it. He welcomed the guests. He thanked them for coming. He said he had a matter to put before them that concerned the nature of the invitations they had received, and he asked their patience while it was addressed, and his voice was entirely level while he said it, which meant the room went very quiet because a level voice at the beginning of something like this carries more weight than alarm. He said he had not written the letters, he had not sent the invitations. The letters had been dispatched in his name and with his seal, which had been taken without his authorization, and he wished the gathered company to understand this before anything else was established, because they had come in good faith and deserved the truth in the same spirit. The room made the sound of 30-odd families reassessing their situations simultaneously, which was a specific sound Mira had not heard before, and which was, she thought, much quieter than she would have expected. Bertram said, "Aldrich, I don't think this is." Aldrich said, "In a moment, cousin." And the gentleness of it was the specific gentleness of someone who has made a decision and does not need to explain it. He laid before the room the evidence in order. The November requisitions, which Mrs. Pelham brought forward in the household's ledger, open to the page, the comparator document, the lease agreement with Bertram's countersignature, which Ord held up for the room to see, and then which Aldrich held against the requisition page so that the writing could be compared by whoever wished to compare it. Miss Wren Sinclair said, from her place near the window, that she had kept a copy of the letter her family received, and that the hand on the letter bore a family resemblance to the hand now being displayed, which was the specific observation Mira had wanted a witness to make on her own terms, which Miss Sinclair made with the calm of someone who had decided to be useful and saw no reason to be dramatic about it. Carew was still beside Bertram. His document case was in his hand. He had not opened it. Aldrich said, there was also a written document from the late Duchess Eleanor of Harwell, which addressed certain rumors that had been in circulation since her death, and which she had written with the explicit intention that it be read before witnesses when the time required it. Bertram said, quietly, you cannot have that letter. Helena burned it. Helena stored it, Aldrich said, in the east attic. She was keeping it until I asked correctly. He paused. I am told she was very loyal. Mira produced the letter. She brought it forward and handed it to Aldrich, and she was aware, as she did it, of Bertram's eyes on her, and she gave him nothing in return, which was the thing she had always been best at, being invisible when being invisible was the only armor she had. Aldrich read the letter aloud, all 3 pages. He read it in the same level voice he used for everything, which meant that the room understood every word, and the room was very still. The last page. I name the witness, and I name the truth. I am not unhappy, and I never was. Carew's document case opened and closed, once in his hands. He was deciding something. Mira watched him decide it. She saw the moment he decided. His expression did not change. His posture changed, very slightly, by the fraction of someone who has released a weight without acknowledgement. She turned her attention to Bertram, because Bertram was the hinge, and Bertram knew it. Bertram was looking at the floor. He had a face made for dignity, and it was doing its best, and under the best it was doing, she could see the grief of someone who had spent a long time building something and was watching it come apart in a well-lit room, and the grief was real. Which surprised her, and then did not surprise her, because she had already read the gesture, the opening and closing hand, and understood it as the movement of someone who is afraid, not merely calculating. Aldrich looked at his cousin. The room held its breath. "I believe," Aldrich said, "that you have been managing a fear rather than a scheme, and I believe the fear is one I could have addressed 4 years ago if either of us had been better at speaking plainly." He was quiet for a moment. "You believed the rumor." "About Eleanor, and you believed you were protecting the title and the estate from something real." Another pause, slower. "You were wrong." "But I do not think you knew you were wrong, and I am not able to call something malice that began as fear." Bertram looked up. His expression was the expression of a man being offered something he has not earned, which is the most destabilizing offer in human experience, because there is no graceful place to stand when you receive it. "The estate's London correspondence will no longer be managed by any single person in an unverified capacity," Aldrich said. "I will make other arrangements. I will communicate to each of the families assembled here, in writing, the explanation they are owed and the expenses they should not have been caused." He looked at his cousin. "Your allowance will continue." "I ask only that you give me your honest answer to one question. For the record of everyone present, did you take or copy or represent to any third party the contents of any letter you told me Helena had given you?" The room waited. Bertram's hand opened and closed against his seam. He looked at Carew. Carew, to his credit, gave him nothing back, not direction, not reassurance, simply an honest face that said, "This is the moment you answer for yourself." "No," Bertram said. "Finally, I told you she had given it to me because I wanted to know if you knew it existed. I never had it." He paused. "I lied. I apologize." He said this in the voice of a man who has not said "I apologize" many times and finds it an unfamiliar weight to carry, but carries it. Carew said he had no legal proceeding to advance and wished the assembled company good morning, and did it with a professional discretion that Mira found she respected, and took his document case and left. She noted that he did not leave before offering a brief, private word to Aldrich, which Aldrich received and acknowledged, and she did not try to know what it contained. Mrs. Pelham took a very deep breath, and then said, in her carrying way, that there was luncheon laid in the west dining room for anyone who wanted it, and that the Duke had arranged for the family's coaches to have fresh horses if they wished to return to London in the afternoon, or accommodation if they wished to stay the night, as they pleased. This was so practical and so welcome that the room's remaining tension dissolved into the practical problem of deciding which option to take, which was exactly what Mrs. Pelham had intended, and Mira made a note to tell her so. Miss Wren Sinclair passed Mira on her way out of the gallery and said, in a low voice, "Well done, Miss Voss." And then, before Mira could respond, "I came here intending to like him, if I could. I like him very much. I hope he marries someone who makes him laugh." She said it without bitterness, with the particular warmth of someone who has decided to be generous because they can afford to be, and Mira thought, I told him she was the most interesting person among the arrivals. I was right. The gallery emptied slowly. Aldrich spoke to each family. He was patient and exact and honest with every one of them, and Mira, watching from her window station, was aware of the specific quality of patience he had, not the patience of someone enduring, but of someone who understands that the thing needs to be done and does it at the speed it requires. At the end, Bertram was the last one left in the gallery besides the household principals. Aldrich looked at his cousin for a moment. Then he walked across the room to him, and he put his hand out. Bertram looked at the hand, and for a moment his face was the face of a man considerably younger than he was, and then he took it. "Come to supper," Aldrich said. "We will talk about what comes next." He let Bertram go, and then he turned, and the gallery was nearly empty, and Mira was still by the window. He crossed the room and stopped in front of her, and for a moment they simply stood in the long light of the gallery's afternoon, which was the particular light of late summer, the kind that knows its season is ending and makes no apology for it. "The ledger figures," he said. "The accounts can be reconstructed. It will take 3 weeks, perhaps 4, and Ord will need to sign off on the comparator documents, but it can be done cleanly." She paused. "The reputational accounting is yours. I cannot write those figures." "No," he looked at her. He had a way of looking at her now that was different from the way he had looked at her in the first week, more direct, less calibrated, with the quality of someone who has stopped deciding whether to trust and simply does. "The families will be compensated, yes, and the explanation will go out in writing. Yes, and the East account will be reorganized with an additional signatory." "Yes," she waited. He was not finished, she could tell by the quality of his stillness, which was a different quality from the one he used when he had completed a thought. "Miss Voss," he said. "My lord." Mira. He said her given name with the care of someone handling something that might break if held wrong, and then with the added precision of someone who has decided it will not. "I am going to say something that has nothing to do with the estate accounts, the London correspondence, Bertram's allowance, or any of the matters we have been managing for the past 5 weeks." "All right," she said. "You may say no. You may say you want time, or you may say you would prefer to remain as you are, and none of those answers will change anything else. Your position here, my regard for you, any of it. I want that to be stated plainly first, because the alternative is a kind of pressure I do not wish to apply." "Stated plainly," she said. "I would like, when you are ready, and if you are willing, to ask you to marry me." He paused. "Because I find that in the matter of my own life I have been managing from inside a closed room, and I would like to do it otherwise. And because you are the most accurate person I have ever met, and I have been surrounded, it turns out, by a great deal of inaccuracy." Another pause, shorter. "And because the morning is better when you are somewhere in it." The gallery was quiet. Outside, she could hear the sounds of coaches preparing to depart in the drive below, and somewhere a bird, the wood pigeon, she thought, back at its patient repetition, 3 up and 2 down. "You do not need to answer now," he said. "I know," she said. "I am answering now because I know what the answer is." She looked at him steadily. "Yes, because I want to, and not for any other reason, there being, as I understand it, no other reason you would take." She paused. "And because you asked me what I would have done on the estate account before you asked me anything else, and that is a considerable evidence of character." He looked at her for a moment. And then, for only the second time she had observed in 3 years, Aldrich Harwell smiled. A real one. The kind that arrived a little late and stayed. The kind that changed his whole face the way sun on the gallery floor changed the room, and it was, she thought, the finest vindication of the tracking she had done. "The first time you smiled," she said, "was when the groom's dog stole Mrs. Pelham's hat." "You were keeping count," he said. "I keep count of everything," she said. "You know that." They were married on a Tuesday in October, in the small church at the edge of the estate, with a congregation of approximately 15 people, of whom Mrs. Pelham was the most emotionally expressive and the least apologetic about it, and Bertram Harwell stood up as a witness, which was not what anyone had expected, and which Aldrich had arranged with the quiet practicality of someone for whom the cost of mercy is never too high. Miss Wren Sinclair sent a gift, a ledger bound in good leather with a note that read, "For all the things you will keep count of." It arrived the week before the wedding, and Mira kept the note. Bertram remained at Harwell Court in a capacity that was less than he had held and more than he deserved, and which he occupied with the slightly subdued energy of a man who has been genuinely surprised by grace and does not yet know what to do with it, but who is learning. He did not revisit the matter of challenges or solicitors. He asked, the following spring, if he might write the charitable correspondence himself, and was given the assignment and performed it with a scrupulous accuracy that Mira observed without comment and filed under sufficient. Carew the solicitor went back to his practice in London. He wrote once to Aldrich on a separate estate matter 6 months later, and was dealt with efficiently and without hard feelings, which was the resolution available to men who retreat before the evidence and know when to retreat. Mrs. Pelham wept at the wedding and then said, loudly, within 2 minutes of the ceremony's conclusion, that the East Garden wanted attention, and someone would need to address it by spring, and that she was not carrying the burden of the aphids alone another season. She received the estate's formal thanks for her 3 decades of service at the new year, which was somewhat overdue, and accepted them with the manner of someone who had expected no less, and found the timing mildly offensive. She remained. Ord from the post-room was given an assistant and a raise, in that order, and continued to file everything he saw. The wood pigeon, or one very like it, in the unverifiable way of pigeons, was back in the East Garden the following summer. It was there on the morning, some 11 months after the Tuesday of the ledger, when Mira stood in the garden room with a cup of tea and watched the light coming up over the wall. And Aldrich came and stood beside her, which was the habit of him now, the comfortable particular weight of his presence just at her shoulder, and she handed him the cup. "The East account," she said. "What about it?" "Fully reconciled. I finished it yesterday." She paused. 7 months of shortfalls, accounted for to the last line. He was quiet a moment. He had the cup in both hands, which was the gesture she had made her own signature of him, the solid, deliberate grip of someone who does not put things down carelessly. "And what does the ledger say?" "That we are in quite good order," she said, "all things considered." The wood pigeon made its 3 ascending notes. The light was the new light of a new summer, pressing against the garden wall exactly as it had pressed the year before, except that this time she did not think of it as wanting in. It was simply light, and the wall was simply a wall, and the garden on the other side of it was theirs, which was the fact she had been working toward for 12 months without knowing it could be named as simply as this. "All things considered," Aldrich said, and the warmth in it was the warmth of a man who has learned to say what he means, and means well. If this story settled something warm behind your ribs, the kind of warmth that comes when the overlooked one is finally seen, when accounts are settled in full, when mercy turns out to cost less than vengeance and give back more, then you have been sitting exactly where I hoped to keep you. The fire has been burning here all this time, and there is always a chair left. If you'd like to stay, I hope you'll subscribe. One more candlelit is one more story I can bring to the hearth. And I want to ask you this, because I've been thinking about it since I first wrote this story. At the moment Mira stood in the gallery, and Aldrich said he would take no answer she did not freely mean. What would you have said? And how long would you have taken to say it? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. Until next time, keep your ledgers honestly, and be patient with the ones who are still learning to ask correctly.